I am Brandon, 35 years old, and the lake house has been the center of our family drama for as long as I can remember. This Christmas dinner started like any other until Dad dropped his bombshell. "We are finally selling the lake house," he announced smugly. My brother Tyler laughed. "Good. Brandon, you are not getting a dime. You never deserved it anyway." Dad grinned. "It is going to Silverpine Ventures, 12 million, all cash." I sipped my wine calmly and said, "Dad, I am Silverpine Ventures." The room fell dead silent. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had a family member underestimate you, and stick around to see how this family showdown unfolded. The lake house was more than just a vacation property. It was a symbol of everything I never had in my family: acceptance, belonging, and recognition. My grandfather Joseph built it with his own hands in the summer of 1967. He was a carpenter who saved every penny from his contracts to buy that land. 3 acres of pristine waterfront property with towering silver pine trees that gave my company its name years later. As a child, I remember running through those woods, skipping stones across the crystal clear water, and feeling a sense of freedom that never existed in our primary home. Grandpa would take me fishing at dawn, teaching me patience, while Dad slept in exhausted from his constant business trips. "The best things come to those who wait," Grandpa would say as we sat quietly watching our lines. I did not realize then how prophetic those words would become. Dad, William James Montgomery, was always working. Even at the lake house, he would spend hours on phone calls hunched over paperwork at the massive oak dining table that Grandpa had built. He was obsessed with his real estate development company, convinced that financial success was the only metric of a man's worth. Mom Catherine tried her best to bridge the gap between Dad and me, but she had her limits. She came from old money, but had married for love, something her parents never forgave her for. She became the perpetual mediator, smoothing ruffled feathers and keeping the peace at any cost. Then there was Tyler, my brother, 2 years older, and infinitely more valued in our father's eyes. Tyler played football, joined Dad on hunting trips, and showed interest in the family business from an early age. He was the golden child who could do no wrong. When he crashed the boat at 16 after drinking beer with his friends, Dad laughed it off as boys being boys. When I got straight, as in school, Dad barely glanced at my report card. "Your brother has natural talent," Dad would say. "You just try too hard." As if my efforts were somehow a character flaw rather than a strength. Tyler basked in the favoritism, using it to further isolate me. "Dad says, you are too sensitive," he would taunt after I complained about being excluded from their fishing trips. "Real men do not need validation." The summer I turned 12, Grandpa passed away. His will left the lake house jointly to Dad and his sister, my Aunt Rebecca. Dad immediately bought out Aunt Rebecca's share, making the property entirely his. "This will stay in the family," he declared at the funeral. "Joseph built this for future generations." What he meant, I later realized, was that it would stay with the family members he deemed worthy. That same summer, I won a regional science competition with a project on sustainable architecture. Mom drove me to the award ceremony because Dad and Tyler were at the lake house for a men's weekend. When I showed Dad my trophy, he set it aside and said, "That is nice, Brandon, but your brother just caught a 10-pound bass." The trophy mysteriously disappeared a week later. Mom helped me search, but we never found it. As the years passed, the pattern continued. Tyler's achievements were celebrated lavishly. My accomplishments were footnotes, if mentioned at all. The lake house became the stage for this ongoing drama of favoritism. Family gatherings there highlighted the divide. Tyler and Dad would boat and fish and talk business. I would help Mom in the kitchen or read alone on the dock. The summer before I left for college, I overheard Dad talking to Tyler about the future. "Someday, this will all be yours," he said, gesturing at the expanse of the property. "You understand its value. Your brother would probably just sell it to fund some idealistic venture." They did not know I was listening from the porch, but those words cemented my understanding of where I stood in the family hierarchy. When Mom found me packing up early to return to the city, she asked what was wrong. I could not bring myself to tell her what I had heard. Just getting a head start on college preparations, I lied. The sadness in her eyes told me she knew better, but she did not push. That was the last summer I spent at the lake house for many years. I made excuses about internships, summer courses, and later work commitments. The truth was, I could not bear to be in a place where I was so clearly unwanted. Leaving home at 18 was both terrifying and liberating. I had been accepted to Cornell University with a partial scholarship, but it nowhere near covered the full cost. When I asked Dad for help with tuition, his response was cutting. "If you want to waste time on a liberal arts degree, you can pay for it yourself," he said. Though I was actually pursuing business and environmental design, Tyler is working in the real world learning practical skills. The fact that Tyler was working at Dad's company with a generous salary straight out of high school went unmentioned. I took out student loans and found 3 part-time jobs: mornings at a coffee shop, evenings at the campus library, and weekends doing graphic design freelance for local businesses. I lived on ramen and free coffee, slept 4 hours a night, and still maintained a 3.9 GPA. Holidays were brief, awkward affairs where Tyler would brag about his latest promotion while Dad beamed. I stopped going home for most breaks, claiming work obligations that were actually true. During my sophomore year, I met Professor Lawrence Jenkins in my business innovation class. He noticed my project on sustainable commercial spaces and asked me to stay after class. "You have a unique perspective," he said, the first authority figure who had ever recognized my potential. "Would you be interested in assisting with my research?" Professor Jenkins became the mentor I never had in my father. He introduced me to industry contacts, pushed me to refine my ideas, and most importantly, believed in me. When I confided in him about my family situation, he shared that he had also been the black sheep in his family. "Success is the best revenge," he told me, "but only if you are doing it for yourself, not to prove something to them." After graduation, I faced my first real failure. A startup I launched with 2 classmates collapsed after 6 months when our initial funding ran out. Dad's response was predictably smug. "Ready to get a real job now?" he asked during a rare phone call. I did not give him the satisfaction of knowing how scared I was. Instead, I moved to Seattle, as far from our New York family home as I could get while staying in the continental United States. I found work with a small investment firm, learning the ropes of venture capital while developing my own business plan at night. I lived in a tiny studio apartment, saved every penny, and built a network of contacts who knew me only as Brandon Montgomery, with no connection to my father's name or company. During those years, I barely maintained contact with my family. Monthly calls with Mom, birthday, and Christmas texts to Dad and Tyler. I missed my nephew's birth and my parents' 30th anniversary celebration. Each absence widened the gulf, making it easier to stay away. Mom occasionally mentioned the lake house, not realizing how the topic still stung. "Your father had the dock rebuilt last summer," she would say. "The contractor overcharged him terribly." I would murmur appropriate responses while thinking that Dad had never let me help with renovations despite my architecture background. Meanwhile, I was building my chosen family. Rachel, my colleague at the investment firm, became my closest friend and eventually my business partner. Michael and Keisha, a couple who lived in my apartment building, included me in their weekly dinners. Professor Jenkins stayed in touch, offering advice and encouragement from across the country. These people saw me clearly and valued me authentically. When I turned 27, I launched Silverpine Ventures with Rachel. The name was my private homage to the trees at the lake house, the only part of that place I truly missed. We started small, focusing on sustainable architecture and green technology investments. Our first major client was a solar panel manufacturer looking to scale their operation. We helped them secure funding and optimize their business model, resulting in a 40% growth in their first year with us. As Silverpine grew, I maintained my privacy. I used B. Montgomery professionally, letting people assume the B stood for anything but Brandon. I kept no photos of my family in my office. When asked about my background, I gave vague answers about growing up in New York. The fewer connections to my past, the easier it was to forge my future on my own terms. During a particularly difficult project, I began seeing a therapist, Dr. Rivera, who helped me understand how deeply my family dynamics had affected me. "You are still seeking your father's approval," she pointed out, "even as you build a life in opposition to him." She was right. Every success felt hollow, because part of me was still that 12-year-old boy with a missing trophy. Occasional family visits were exercises in restraint. Tyler would brag about his latest acquisition or promotion. Dad would pontificate about business trends I knew were outdated. Mom would try desperately to find common ground. I would sit quietly, not sharing that I had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal or launched a successful sustainable housing project. The pattern was familiar and oddly comforting in its predictability. Then 3 years ago, something changed. A business news article mentioned my father's company facing financial difficulties after a major development project failed. Further research revealed a pattern of poor investments and overextension. William Montgomery Developments was in trouble, though they were keeping up appearances. I began quietly monitoring their situation not out of malice but out of curiosity. Last year, through industry channels, I learned that the lake house had been mortgaged to shore up the failing business. The property that Dad had declared would always stay in the family was being used as collateral. Something shifted in me then. Not revenge exactly, but a desire for resolution. I instructed my financial team to create a shell company that could not be traced back to me and began planning an acquisition. When the Christmas invitation came this year, I accepted for the first time in 5 years. It was time to go home. Silverpine Ventures did not become a powerhouse overnight. The early days were filled with rejection, 18-hour workdays, and moments of doubt when I questioned whether I had made a catastrophic mistake, leaving the security of my previous job. Rachel and I worked from a tiny rented office with furniture we bought secondhand. Our first 3 investment pitches were rejected. One potential client actually laughed us out of his office. "You need a trust fund, or a famous last name in this business," another investor told us bluntly. I thought of the famous last name I had deliberately distanced myself from and recommitted to succeeding on my own merit. Our breakthrough came unexpectedly. A small eco-friendly construction company in Portland was seeking investors to help them scale. Larger firms had passed because the profit margins seemed too thin, but I recognized something in their business model that others had missed. Their integrated approach to sustainable materials sourcing cut costs in ways that would become increasingly valuable as environmental regulations tightened. We secured them $2 million in funding in exchange for a modest equity stake. Within 18 months, their business tripled. They were featured in Architectural Digest, and suddenly Silverpine Ventures was on the map. Calls started coming in, instead of us always reaching out. As we grew, I assembled a team that reflected my values rather than my father's. Where Dad prioritized Ivy League credentials and family connections, I looked for innovation and authenticity. Jasmine, our head of research, came from a community college and had worked her way up through sheer brilliance. Leo, our chief financial strategist, had turned down positions at prestigious firms to work with us because he believed in our mission of sustainable investment. My leadership style became the antithesis of my father's. Where he ruled through intimidation and withholding approval, I cultivated collaboration and recognition. Every team member received equity. Decisions were made transparently. Success was celebrated collectively. The irony that I had learned how to lead by experiencing what not to do was not lost on me. By year 3, Silverpine had 28 employees and had facilitated over $80 million in investments. Our focus on sustainable architecture and green technology put us ahead of market trends. When environmental, social, and governance (ESG) criteria became industry buzzwords, we already had a 5-year track record in the space. My personal financial situation transformed accordingly. I moved from my studio apartment to a modest house, then eventually to a penthouse apartment with views of Puget Sound. I still lived well below my means, investing most of my income back into the company, or into my own carefully diversified portfolio. The lessons of watching my father's company overextend had left their mark. Throughout this growth, I maintained my anonymity as much as possible. I rarely gave interviews. When I did, they were print only, no photos. At industry events, I would introduce myself simply as Brandon from Silverpine. On paper, the company was owned by a series of trusts and LLCs that obscured the ultimate beneficial owner. Even some of our employees did not know I was the founder and CEO, believing instead that I was just a senior executive. This privacy served multiple purposes. It protected me from being judged by my family name either positively or negatively. It allowed our work to stand on its own merits. and increasingly, it became a strategic advantage as I began researching my father's business dealings. The more I investigated William Montgomery developments, the clearer their financial troubles became. Dad had over-leveraged on several projects, assuming that real estate values would continue to rise indefinitely. When the market cooled in certain sectors, he was caught exposed. Tyler, now executive vice president, had pushed for several ill-advised acquisitions that further strained their resources. The Lake House mortgage was just the tip of the iceberg. They had taken loans against nearly all their assets. Vendors were being paid increasingly late. Projects were being delayed. The company that Dad had spent his life building was on the verge of collapse, and his pride prevented him from admitting it or seeking appropriate help. Through discreet channels, I learned that they were quietly shopping the lake house to potential buyers. The property that was supposed to stay in the family forever was on the market out of desperate necessity. Dad's financial team had valued it at $8 million, a fair market price given the location and acreage, but they were hoping for more given its unique features and historical character. I made my decision methodically, not emotionally. I created Silverpine Holdings, a subsidiary that could not be traced back to me personally, and instructed them to make an offer significantly above asking price. $12 million, all cash, with a quick closing and minimal contingencies. The kind of offer that desperate sellers dream of. When Dad's company snapped it up, I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, or revenge, or even closure, just a strange sense of things coming full circle. The property that had symbolized my exclusion from the family was now mine, though no one knew it yet. As Christmas approached, I made my preparations carefully. I booked a first-class ticket to New York. I arranged for a luxury rental car. I bought expensive but tasteful gifts for everyone, including Tyler's wife Stephanie, and their 2 children whom I barely knew. I packed my best suits, casual clothes that cost more than what Dad would recognize, but did not ostentatiously display wealth. And I waited for the moment when all the cards would finally be on the table. The drive to my parents' suburban Westchester home felt like traveling back in time. The same winding roads, the same stone entrance markers, the same feeling of my stomach tightening as the familiar Tudor-style house came into view. I parked my rented Audi behind Tyler's massive SUV and sat for a moment, gathering my composure. Mom answered the door, her face lighting up with genuine joy. "Brandon, you made it." She hugged me tightly, and I caught the scent of her perfume, Chanel No. 5, unchanged since my childhood. She pulled back to look at me. "You look wonderful. So handsome in that coat." Dad appeared behind her martini, already in hand, though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. "The prodigal son returns," he said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. We shook hands formally, neither of us attempting a hug. "Good to see you, Dad," I said, the practiced lie coming easily after years of use. The house was decorated elaborately for Christmas. Mom's doing, no doubt. A 12-foot tree dominated the living room, decorated in the same red and gold ornaments she had used my entire life. Garlands wrapped the staircase, and the scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air. Some things never changed. Tyler and his family arrived shortly after me. His wife Stephanie air-kissed my cheeks, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Brandon, it has been forever," she gushed. "You look so different." The surprise in her voice suggested she had expected the same awkward younger brother Tyler had always described, not the confident man before her. My niece and nephew Madison and Connor, aged 8 and 6, regarded me with suspicious curiosity. I handed them their gifts, watching their excitement as they tore through the wrapping paper to find the latest gaming console and an elaborate dollhouse. Tyler frowned slightly at the extravagance. "You did not have to go overboard," he said, his tone suggesting both criticism and envy. "I have missed a lot of birthdays," I replied simply. Other family members filtered in throughout the afternoon. Aunt Rebecca, Dad's sister, who had always been kind to me, her husband Frank, perpetually forgettable in his beige sweaters, cousins Patrick and Sarah, with their respective spouses, Mom's brother Uncle James and his third wife Kimberly, who was younger than me, the standard cast of characters for a Montgomery Christmas. The hours before dinner passed in a blur of small talk and catching up. I kept my answers vague when asked about work. Business consulting in Seattle was my standard response, followed by redirecting questions to the other person. Years of practice had made me skilled at appearing open while revealing nothing. In the kitchen, I found Mom preparing her traditional Christmas Eve feast: prime rib Yorkshire pudding, roasted vegetables, and her famous triple chocolate cake for dessert. I rolled up my sleeves and began helping her chop vegetables, falling into our old rhythm. "You seem different," she said quietly, keeping her eyes on the roast she was seasoning, more settled somehow. "I am in a good place," I admitted. "Work is going well." She nodded, seeming to understand there were depths I was not sharing. "Your father has been under a lot of stress lately," she said, changing the subject. "The business, well, it has been challenging." "So I have heard." Her hands stilled. "You keep up with the family business." "I keep up with the industry," I said carefully. "Word gets around." She seemed about to say more when Tyler burst into the kitchen, reaching around her to steal a slice of cucumber. "Mom, Dad wants to know when dinner will be ready. The natives are getting restless." 6:30? "Same as always," she replied, with practiced patience. Tyler noticed me helping and raised an eyebrow. "Look at you playing sous chef. Always were more comfortable with the women's work, huh?" I could have pointed out that many of the world's top chefs were men, or that his outdated gender stereotypes revealed more about his insecurities than my choices, but I simply smiled. Someone has to help Mom. Tyler leaned against the counter, his expensive watch prominently displayed as he crossed his arms. "So Brandon, seriously, what are you really doing in Seattle? Dad thinks you are probably just coasting along at some small firm, but I told him, you must be doing okay if you can afford those gifts." The dismissiveness was so familiar, it almost made me laugh. "I do all right," I said mildly. "Well, not everyone can cut it in real development," he said with false generosity. "The family business takes a certain kind of drive." Before I could respond, I overheard Dad and Uncle James talking in the adjacent dining room, their voices low but audible. "The lake house deal closes next week," Dad was saying. "Thank God. Without that cash infusion, we would be in Chapter 11 by February." "12 million seems high," Uncle James replied. "Who is the buyer again?" "Some investment group called Silverpine Ventures. They made a cash offer, no questions asked. Probably turn it into condos or a resort. Shame but necessary." I felt a strange calm settle over me. The stage was set perfectly. As we gathered for dinner, I observed the elaborate table setting. Mom's best china, the sterling silver flatware that had been her grandmother's crystal wine glasses catching the light from the chandelier. A picture-perfect family Christmas that would soon be upended entirely. I caught Mom watching me with a curious expression as we took our seats. Had she noticed something in my demeanor, I gave her a reassuring smile, which she returned with a slight furrow in her brow. Of everyone present, she had always been the most perceptive, though her insights were usually suppressed in favor of keeping the peace. As Dad stood at the head of the table to carve the prime rib, I took a slow sip of my Cabernet and prepared for the evening to truly begin. The dining room glowed with warm light from the chandelier and scattered candles. Steam rose from serving dishes, laden with prime rib, creamy mashed potatoes, roasted Brussels sprouts with bacon and Yorkshire puddings, golden brown and perfectly risen. Crystal glasses caught the light, throwing tiny rainbows across the crisp white tablecloth. It was picture perfect, exactly as Mom had always orchestrated our holiday meals. Before we eat, Dad announced, standing tall at the head of the table in his Brooks Brothers sweater, "I would like to propose a toast." He raised his glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the light, to family, to tradition, and to new beginnings. The cryptic addition made several people exchange glances, but everyone dutifully raised their glasses. Dad remained standing clearly, not finished. "Since we are all gathered here, I have an announcement to make." He paused for effect, a technique he had used in countless business presentations. "As some of you may know, Montgomery Developments has been repositioning our asset portfolio. Corporate speak, for we are in financial trouble. But only those with business background would recognize the euphemism. As part of that strategy," he continued, "we have made the difficult but necessary decision to sell the lake house." Gasps and murmurs rippled around the table. Aunt Rebecca looked particularly shocked. "William, no. Dad built that house. Sometimes, We must make hard choices, Dad said solemnly. The property has become more of a liability than an asset. Mom's face showed resigned acceptance. She had known then. I maintained a neutral expression, sipping my wine, slowly waiting. This was his show for now. Tyler jumped in supportively. It is just good business sense. That property has been underutilized for years. He shot me a pointed look. Some of us understood its value, others never did. Dad nodded in agreement. The proceeds will strengthen the company's position considerably. His eyes swept the table but conspicuously avoided landing on me. Of course, this affects inheritance plans that had been in place. Here it comes, I thought. Dad cleared his throat. Brandon, I know you had certain expectations regarding the lake house. This was news to me, as he had made it quite clear I would never have a claim to it. But circumstances have changed. The property will be sold, and the proceeds will go entirely to the company. You will not be receiving any portion. A heavy silence fell over the table. Every eye turned to me, waiting for my reaction to this public disinheritance. I took another sip of wine, letting the tension build. Tyler, never one to miss an opportunity to twist the knife, laughed and added, Good. You never deserved it anyway. You have not contributed a thing to maintaining the place in years. Several family members looked uncomfortable at his cruelty. Uncle James frowned disapprovingly. Aunt Rebecca studied her plate intently. No one spoke up in my defense. Dad, perhaps feeling Tyler had gone too far in front of the extended family, attempted to soften the blow. The good news is, we found an excellent buyer. Silverpine Ventures. They are paying $12 million all cash. His chest puffed slightly with pride at the figure. Well above market value. The deal closes next week. Silverpine Ventures, Uncle James asked. Never heard of them. They are an investment group out of Seattle, Dad explained. Relatively new but aggressive. They specialize in sustainable development. I set my wine glass down deliberately, the soft clink drawing attention. The moment had arrived. Actually, I said quietly, they specialize in sustainable architecture and green technology investments. Development is a secondary focus. Dad looked at me with confusion. You know them. I allowed myself a small smile. You could say that. I paused, feeling the weight of 2 decades of dismissal and disregard. Dad, I am Silverpine Ventures. The room fell dead silent. Every face registered shock in different ways. Dad's smug expression froze, then crumbled into disbelief. Tyler's mouth literally dropped open, his fork clattering against his plate. Mom's eyes widened. Then a slow, knowing smile spread across her face, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. That is impossible. Dad finally managed his voice, uncharacteristically weak. Silverpine is a major investment firm. They manage hundreds of millions in assets. $742 million as of last quarter, I corrected calmly. I founded the company 8 years ago with my business partner Rachel. We started small, but we have grown considerably. Tyler recovered his voice. You are lying. This is some kind of sick joke. I reached for my phone, opened my email, and passed it to Aunt Rebecca, who was sitting nearest to me. That is the purchase agreement for the lake house. You will notice it is signed by B. Montgomery, CEO of Silverpine Ventures. I turned to Dad. Your lawyers never asked what the B stood for. Aunt Rebecca confirmed, It is true, William. The signature page clearly shows Brandon Montgomery as the purchaser. This is insane, Tyler sputtered. You do not have that kind of money. You work at some no-name consulting firm. I never actually said that, I replied. When people asked what I did, I said I was in business in Seattle. You all made assumptions about what that meant. Dad's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Why would you hide this? Why the secrecy? The shell company? The misleading information? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Would you have treated me differently if you had known I was successful? I asked simply. His silence was answer enough. $12 million. Aunt Rebecca mused, breaking the tension. In cash. For Joseph's house. She started laughing, a genuine belly laugh that gradually infected others around the table. Oh, William, the irony is just perfect. Mom raised her wine glass toward me in a subtle toast, her eyes shining with what looked like pride. I always knew you would surprise us all someday, she said quietly. Dad remained frozen, processing the complete reversal of power that had just occurred at his perfectly orchestrated dinner table. Tyler looked like he might be ill. Uncle James was the first to ask the obvious question. So what happens now? With the lake house, I mean. All eyes turned back to me, awaiting the next revelation. The remainder of dinner was a surreal experience. Conversation happened around me rather than with me, as family members processed the bombshell I had dropped. Mom mechanically served dessert. A few people ate. Most just pushed cake around on their plates while stealing glances at me, Dad, and Tyler. If you will excuse us, Dad finally said, setting down his napkin with exaggerated care. I believe my son and I need to have a private conversation. His tone made it clear which son he meant. We moved to his study, that sacred space where I had rarely been welcome as a child. The room still smelled of leather and the pipe tobacco he had given up years ago. Golf trophies and business awards lined the shelves. Photos of him and Tyler at various events decorated the walls. Not a single image of me was visible. As soon as the door closed, Dad's mask of civility dropped. What the hell do you think you are doing? He demanded, his voice low but intense. Is this some kind of revenge plot? Humiliating me in front of our entire family? That was not my intention, I replied calmly. Though I cannot say I am particularly bothered by it either. Then what is your game? Buy the lake house out from under us. Just to what? Tear it down. Turn it into condos after all. I settled into one of the leather chairs across from his desk. I have no plans to develop the property, Dad. I bought it because it was the right thing to do. The right thing. He barked a humorless laugh. How is deceiving your family the right thing? The deception was necessary because honesty has never worked with you, I said. And I meant it was the right business decision. The property is significantly undervalued at $12 million given the waterfront access and acreage. So this is about money, he said, as if confirming a long-held suspicion. Number. This is about truth. The lake house is a tangible reminder of every time you chose Tyler over me, every time you dismissed my accomplishments, every time you made me feel unwelcome in this family. Dad poured himself another scotch, not offering me one. So it is revenge. Call it what you want. I call it justice. The door opened without a knock, and Tyler stormed in, face flushed with anger or alcohol or both. This is bullshit, he announced. There is no way you built a company worth hundreds of millions. It is not possible. Why, I asked genuinely. Because I am not you. Because I am not Dad. Because I was never the favorite. Because you do not have what it takes, Tyler spat. You never did. Always hiding behind books and ideas, instead of getting your hands dirty in the real world. I laughed softly. The real world, Tyler. You have never lived in the real world. You went straight from college to a vice presidency at Dad's company. You have never had to earn anything. I earned my position, he protested. How? By being born first? By playing football? By parroting Dad's outdated business philosophies? Dad interjected. That is enough. This bickering solves nothing. He leveled his gaze at me. What do you want, Brandon? Money, recognition? What will it take for you to sell the lake house back to us? It is not for sale, I said simply. Everything has a price, Dad insisted, falling back on his negotiator's instincts. Not everything, no. I leaned forward. Let me be clear. I did not buy the lake house to flip it or to hold it hostage. I bought it because your company is failing, and without this cash infusion, you would be bankrupt within months. Dad's face confirmed my assessment. Tyler looked between us in confusion. What is he talking about? We are just repositioning assets. Strategic downsizing. We are drowning, Tyler, Dad admitted, deflating visibly. The Westport development failed. The Chicago acquisition was a disaster. We have been keeping up appearances, but the company is on life support. Tyler collapsed into a chair, the reality finally hitting him. Why did not you tell me I am the executive vice president? Because you helped create the problem, I said bluntly. Those acquisitions were your idea. Were not they? Dad did not deny it. Tyler's silence was confirmation enough. So now what? Dad asked suddenly, looking his age. You own the lake house. You know our company is failing. Is this where you offer to buy us out too? Take over Montgomery Developments and complete your revenge. I have no interest in your company, I said truthfully. My focus is sustainable investment, not traditional real estate development. Your business model is outdated anyway. Then what do you want? Dad demanded again. Acknowledgement, I said simply. Recognition that I succeeded not because of you, but despite you. That everything you thought about me was wrong. That the son you dismissed and discarded built something more successful than you ever did without your name or your connections or your money. The words hung in the air between us. Dad stared at me, really seeing me perhaps for the first time, and the lake house, he finally asked. Stays in the family, I replied, just not the way you planned. A soft knock at the door interrupted us. Mom entered without waiting for a response. The guests are leaving, she said. They think it is best to give us some privacy. Her eyes moved between the three of us, assessing the tension. Have we reached any understanding? Your son, Dad said bitterly, has apparently been secretly building an empire while pretending to be a nobody. And now he owns the lake house and is gloating about our company's failures. Mom surprised me by laughing lightly. Oh, William, you still do not see it, do you? She turned to me. I suspected something when you started sending those larger checks for my birthday. No nobody writes 5-figure checks as casual gifts. I smiled at her perceptiveness. I should have known you would notice. A mother always knows when her child is hiding something, she said warmly. I just did not know the scale. She turned to Dad and Tyler. You two should be ashamed. Instead of attacking Brandon, you should be asking how he built such a successful business. You might actually learn something. Tyler scoffed. Learn from him, please. Yes, learn from me, I said, patience wearing thin. Learn that sustainable business practices are not just ethical, but profitable. Learn that treating employees with respect creates loyalty and innovation. Learn that diversification is safer than over-leveraging on speculative developments. Are you lecturing us now? Dad asked incredulously. No, I am offering you a lifeline, I replied. Silverpine Ventures occasionally partners with traditional firms to help them transition to more sustainable models. We could discuss a potential consultation arrangement. The offer hung in the air. Dad's pride warred visibly with his desperation. Tyler looked stunned by the role reversal. Why would you help us? Dad finally asked. After everything. Because unlike you, I do not make business decisions based on personal feelings, I said. And because despite everything you are still family. Mom smiled approvingly. Well, I think that is enough business talk for Christmas Eve. Brandon, will you be staying the night? I have a hotel room in the city, I said. Nonsense. Your old room is made up. Her tone brooked no argument. As we left Dad's study, Tyler grabbed my arm. This is not over, he hissed. You cannot just waltz back in here and take over. I removed his hand calmly. I did not take anything, Tyler. I built something of my own. You are welcome to try doing the same. Later, alone in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by debate trophies and science awards that Mom had apparently preserved all these years, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The confrontation had gone differently than I had imagined. Not the satisfaction of revenge, but something more complex, the beginning perhaps of a new chapter. A soft knock on my door revealed Mom holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate, just as she used to when I was troubled as a child. I thought you might still be awake, she said, handing me one. Quite a dinner performance. I did not mean it to be a performance, I said, taking the mug gratefully. Everything with this family is a performance, she replied with surprising candor. Your father is reeling. Tyler is furious. And I am. She paused, searching for the right word. Proud. So very proud of what you have built. Why did not you ever stand up for me? I asked the question that had lingered for decades. She sighed heavily. I thought I was protecting you by not fighting those battles. I was wrong. I should have been braver. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Can you forgive me? There is nothing to forgive. I said, meaning it. You did your best. And now, what happens with the lake house? I have not decided yet, I admitted. But whatever happens, It will respect Grandpa's legacy. That I can promise. She squeezed my hand. He would have been so proud of you. After a moment, she added, Your father might never admit it, but he is proud too. Underneath all that bluster. I did not believe that, but I appreciated her attempt at bridge building. Merry Christmas, Mom. Merry Christmas, my brilliant son. She kissed my forehead and left me to my thoughts. As I sipped the hot chocolate, I realized that ownership of the lake house had shifted something fundamental in our family dynamic. The question now was what to build in place of the old patterns that had been broken beyond repair. The days following Christmas unfolded in unexpected ways. I extended my stay in New York, canceling meetings in Seattle that my team could handle without me. Something had been set in motion that required my presence to see through. Dad avoided me initially leaving early for the office, despite the holiday week. Tyler and his family departed abruptly for a ski trip in Vermont, his final words to me, a muttered threat about consulting his lawyers. Mom moved between us all like a diplomat carrying messages and smoothing ruffled feathers. 3 days after Christmas, Mom surprised me by asking to see where I worked. Not in Seattle, obviously, she clarified. But you must have a New York office. I did a sleek space in Midtown that I rarely used personally. I arranged for a car to take us there the next day. Mom walked through the Silverpine Ventures New York headquarters with wide eyes taking in the sustainable design elements, the wall of awards, and most surprisingly to her, the obvious respect my employees showed me. Mr. Montgomery, my New York director Alicia, greeted me warmly. We were not expecting you. The Singapore deal closed successfully yesterday. Excellent work, I replied. Alicia, this is my mother, Catherine Montgomery. Mrs. Montgomery, Alicia exclaimed. What an honor! Your son has built an extraordinary company. Mom beamed with pride. So I am learning. Would you mind showing me around? I would love to understand what Brandon has created. As Alicia led Mom through the office, pointing out our project displays and explaining our investment philosophy, I retreated to the corner office kept ready for my infrequent visits. A text from Rachel checked in on the family drama fallout, as she called it. Ongoing, I replied, but productive, I think. Mom found me there an hour later, her expression thoughtful. You have created something remarkable, she said. Sustainable architecture, green technology, ethical investment practices. All these people working towards something meaningful. She shook her head in wonder. Why did not you ever tell us? Would it have mattered? I asked honestly. Her silence acknowledged the truth. Dad and Tyler would have dismissed my success as luck or a trend or somehow less legitimate than traditional real estate development. Your father called while we were touring, she said, changing the subject. He would like to meet, just the two of you. I agreed with conditions. Not at his office, not at the house, but on neutral ground. We settled on a quiet steakhouse in the city the following evening. Dad arrived exactly on time, dressed impeccably as always, but looking somehow diminished. The invincible titan of my childhood had been replaced by an aging man facing the collapse of everything he had built. Thank you for meeting me. He began stiffly after we had ordered. This is difficult for me. I can imagine, I replied, neither helping nor hindering his effort. He took a deep breath. The lake house. I need to know your intentions. Direct and transactional, exactly as expected. I plan to keep it in the family, I said. Renovate it. Restore it to what Grandpa intended. And the company, he asked, the real reason for the meeting finally emerging. Your offer of consultation, was that genuine? It was. He nodded slowly. We need help, he admitted, the words clearly costing him. More than consultation. We need investment, partnership, a complete reorganization. That would require significant changes, I warned. Your business model is fundamentally flawed. Your management style is outdated. Your projects are environmentally unsustainable. He flinched at each assessment, but did not argue. What would you propose? I outlined a potential partnership structure. Silverpine would provide capital and expertise. Montgomery Developments would contribute its remaining viable assets and client relationships. The resulting entity would focus on sustainable commercial development, preserving jobs, but completely reshaping the company's direction. And who would lead this new entity? Dad asked the critical question. Neither of us, I said firmly. A neutral CEO with experience in both traditional and sustainable development. You would remain as chairman emeritus. I would have no operational role, but would sit on the board. And Tyler. That depends on his willingness to adapt, I said honestly. His current approach will not work in the new organization. Dad was quiet for a long time, processing the proposal. Finally, he asked, "Why would you do this? You could let us fail. Buy the assets for pennies on the dollar." Because despite everything, the Montgomery name still means something to me, I admitted. And because destroying what you built would not give me any satisfaction. No, he said thoughtfully. You were always different that way. He hesitated before adding, I never understood you. Not really. It was the closest thing to an apology I expected to get. I know. Your grandfather would have understood you better, he continued. He valued different things than I did. Sustainability, community, building things to last. He looked at me directly. The lake house. He would approve of you having it. The unexpected acknowledgement caught me off guard. Thank you, I said simply. We spent the next 2 hours outlining the framework of a potential deal. Dad was sharp, his business acumen still evident despite his company's troubles. We found unexpected common ground in certain areas. By the end of the meal, we had the skeleton of an agreement that might save his company while advancing my sustainable development goals. As we prepared to leave, Dad hesitated. Brandon, your company, Silverpine. It is impressive. What you have built. The words were halting but sincere. I was wrong about you. The admission I had waited decades to hear landed with less impact than I had imagined. Thank you, I said again, not needing to elaborate. Tyler proved more difficult. He returned from Vermont and demanded a meeting with both Dad and me. His initial reaction to our proposed partnership was predictably hostile. This is a takeover, he accused. You are using our temporary financial issues to seize control. If I wanted control, I would wait 6 months and buy the bankrupt company's assets, I pointed out. This proposal preserves the Montgomery name and many of the jobs. At the cost of everything we stand for, Tyler protested. Dad surprised me by interjecting. And what exactly do we stand for? Tyler overleveraged development's outdated building practices. Declining profit margins. Tyler stared at Dad in shock. You are taking his side now. I am trying to save what can be saved, Dad replied wearily. Brandon is offering us a lifeline. We would be fools not to consider it. The discussion continued for hours, Tyler gradually moving from outright rejection to grudging consideration as the reality of their financial situation sank in. By the end, he had accepted the inevitable, though not happily. I will need to see more details, he insisted, and I want a significant role in the new organization. That can be discussed. I conceded contingent on your willingness to embrace new approaches. As spring approached, the legal details of both the lake house transfer and the business partnership were finalized. I commissioned a complete renovation of the lake house, focusing on sustainable upgrades while preserving the character Grandpa had created. Solar panels were integrated into the roof design. Geothermal heating was installed. The dock was rebuilt, using sustainable materials. I invited the entire family for the Memorial Day weekend, the traditional start of the lake house season. Mom helped coordinate her enthusiasm for the project heartwarming. Dad contributed unexpectedly, providing old photos and even some of Grandpa's original drawings for certain features. Tyler and Stephanie came with their children, still standoffish, but making an effort. Aunt Rebecca and the extended family filled out the gathering, curious to see both the renovated property and the changed family dynamics. Standing on the rebuilt dock that Sunday evening, watching the sunset paint the lake in gold and crimson, I felt Dad's presence before he spoke. You have done a good job here, he said, gesturing at the renovated house. Joseph would approve. That matters to me, I admitted. He nodded, understanding. The new company launches next week. Montgomery Silverpine. I confirmed. The paperwork is ready. Tyler seems to be adapting better than I expected, Dad observed. The sustainability training programs were a good idea. He has potential, I acknowledged. If he can let go of outdated thinking. Dad chuckled softly. Like his father, you mean? I did not deny it. I was proud, Brandon, he said after a long silence. Too proud to see what was in front of me. Too proud to admit when I was wrong. Too proud to recognize success that did not fit my narrow definition. He turned to face me directly. I am trying to be better. I know, I said, and I did. The past months had shown me a different side of my father, not transformed, but evolving, making an effort I had never expected. This place, he gestured to the lake and the house behind us, it was always about legacy for me, continuing what my father built. I thought Tyler understood that better than you did. He shook his head. I was wrong. You understood it perfectly. You just saw a different way to honor it. We stood in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky. Not fully reconciled, perhaps, but no longer adversaries. Later, as the family gathered around the fire pit on the shore, my niece Madison approached shyly. Uncle Brandon, Mom says, you own this place now. Does that mean we can still come here? Of course, I assured her. This is a family home. It always will be. She beamed and ran back to her brother. I caught Mom watching me, a gentle smile on her face. Tyler raised his beer bottle in a reluctant toast. Dad nodded approvingly. Aunt Rebecca winked at me from across the fire. The lake house had come full circle. Once a symbol of my exclusion, now it represented a new beginning. Not perfect, not without complications, but authentic. The damaged relationships in our family would never be fully repaired, but they were being rebuilt on a stronger foundation of truth and mutual respect. As I looked around at my imperfect family, I realized that success was never about proving my worth to them. It was about discovering my own value and creating something meaningful with it. The 12-year-old boy with the missing trophy had finally found his recognition, not in his father's approval, but in his own achievements. The lake house would remain in the family just as Grandpa had intended. But now it stood for something more. The power of resilience, the importance of forging your own path, and the possibility of healing even the deepest family wounds through truth and boundaries. I wonder if you have ever had a moment where your family finally saw your true value after years of being underestimated, or have you ever had to create success on your own terms when no one believed in you? Share your experiences in the plain comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family redemption and personal triumph. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all, but building something so magnificent they cannot help but recognize your worth.